Welcome back, psychologists. I'm your professor, Ryan Keith. One of the things that my wife Nicole and I are most excited about is for Grady to start using his words. I mean, not only is it a really great landmark, but once Grady can talk, he'll be able to tell us what he wants and what's wrong when something is bothering him and what he's most excited about. And one of the things you can imagine he's going to learn about first, when we learned our first words, when we learn words in foreign languages, are objects, persons, places, things, nouns. And among the other things that Grady's likely to learn about, of course, are objects he's surrounded by, like our dog, Ruger. I'm sure that after his first birthday has come and gone, he's going to be talking about doggy this and doggy that. But what happens when he comes across something unexpected? A furry animal that's got 4 legs and a tail and a neck and a head, but it's way, way bigger than a doggy. When, for example, he first sees a horse. Will he be able to tell it's something different from a dog? Will he think it's just another dog, a new kind of dog? Cognitive and developmental psychologist Jean Piaget looked at this problem of how children or adults can classify information and specifically examined how they integrate these new kinds of information into their cognition. In integrating this information, Piaget proposed that we try to establish an equilibrium between what we know and expect about the world and what we observe. And that when what we expect and know about the world and what we observe, when we expect doggies and see doggies, match up, we feel comfortable. But when that gets out of balance, we will put psychological effort, psychological energy into figuring out what's wrong and fixing it. He proposed that we can go through a couple of different processes to figure this out. The easier one is assimilation. We know all about doggies, like my brown dog Ruger. He's a boxer, and then we observe one with spots, like a Dalmatian. It's easy enough to conclude that there are, in fact, spotted dogs called Dalmatians, and assimilate this information in. It's just a different kind of doggy, or a doggy with a different name, or a baby doggy, or an old doggy. What's much harder is something called accommodation, when we have to change our understandings of the world to accommodate new information. There's this whole new class of animal I didn't even know about called a horse, for example. And now I need to know how horses are different from doggies, what kinds of horses there are, how I interact with them. I mean, do horses even like kibble? I don't know. It's a lot more difficult, and we avoid making that choice at all if we can. But in this way, we can see on the most obvious and basic level something we all go through, this process of equilibration and trying to understand the world around us, using the information and how it's organized in our head into what are called schemas. In this brief video, I want to talk to you a little bit about schemas and a flip side of schemas that's not talked about in your textbook called construals. Schemas are all about how we naturally organize information from the world all around us. One of the things we naturally do is group like objects into an organized structure. We can group objects or people or places or activities into classifications that there are certain kinds of food, Italian food or Chinese food or Honduran food or Mexican food. There are certain kinds of movies, action movies, comedy movies, romantic movies. If you want to get complex, we might have romantic comedies or a romantic comedy with a little bit of action thrown in. But we understand the world by examining what kind of an object something is, or an action or a person something is, and making connections to others. When somebody asks you about a musical artist, what kind of musical artist are you listening to? How do you answer that question? If you were to ask me what I was listening to before I started recording this video, I was listening to some music by an artist I'm going to see in March named Jason Isbell. And your next question is going to be, what kind of music is it? We struggle to understand not just based on what something is, like really the information that's in front of us, but what it means in terms of the other things we already know. And I might struggle to tell you, well, Jason Isbell, he's kind of country. He's kind of singer-songwriter, kind of alt-Americana, this label that doesn't mean anything to most people, alt-Americana. Because what I want to do is describe this in a way that makes sense to me, but also makes sense to you. And this is how we use our schemas. A schema refers to not necessarily a group of things or objects or people or ideas, but everything you know about that group of objects or things or people or ideas. For example, if I talk about a car, because you have a schema in your head for car, all of the information about cars is organized in your head in a way that helps you understand what a car is. When I talk about a car, you automatically get a picture in your head that includes everything you know about cars. Since I mentioned the word car, you imagine 4 wheels, a windshield, 2 to 4 doors, a roof. And depending on your experience, you might think of other things. You might picture a sedan with 4 doors and a trunk, or a hatchback with 2 doors and a little back that goes up and down. Or even though I said car, you might be picturing a pickup truck. We all have different schemas in our heads for these things. Again, depending on our experience, especially our social experience. If you were to tell one of your friends that you were watching a video recorded by your professor, what would they imagine? Would they imagine someone like me, male and white, and I think relatively young, though not that young anymore? How about the way that I'm dressed? Is this how professors dress, or am I just dressed like this because I've got a meeting after this video and it's cold outside? And what would that mean if you were to walk into a room looking for a professor? Who would you expect to be the professor? What would you expect them to look like, to sound like, to act like? You might imagine that it would be somebody, well, psychology professor, maybe I kind of do look the part. I'm a white guy with a beard and a jacket. I don't have the elbow patches, but if I had a pipe, it wouldn't be out of character, right? These are the things that we expect from a class of objects or ideas or people or things. And if you're thinking that like grouping people into these classifications where they all share similar qualities feels a little icky, kind of like racism or sexism or ageism or some other ism that's based on a stereotype, well, you're right. That's exactly what we're talking about doing. Grouping people or objects or animals or food or music based on some superficial qualities, right? That's exactly what a stereotype is. It's fueled by schemas, but often in problematic ways. I mean, there may be things that are true about professors, right? We all have the same job title or similar education. There similarly might be things about students that are all true. You all want to get a degree, right? And you're here in this class working hard to learn about psychology. But there are problems in how we build our stereotypes that lead them not just to be harmful, but also to be inaccurate. For example, I'm going to borrow some terms from your textbook here. Our stereotypes are based on information that we recall, right? The examples that we think of. And when you think about a student or a professor or something more problematic, you're not going to think about really boring examples. You're going to think of the ones that get your attention, what are called salient examples. A salient example is something that's attention-getting. And an attention-getting thing is not usually an average or a very good representation of a thing. You're going to think about the most obvious representation you could. So to borrow a stereotype that I often think of when I talk to students, it's that I teach at the Davis Center, which is located in Archer, Florida, which is a pretty country place. And when you think about who you might find at that country place, why, you'll think about somebody who drives a big pickup truck. Big pickup truck with smokestacks so they can be rolling coal, and it's lifted and it's got huge tires and a Confederate flag on the back and a "Don't Tread on Me" sticker, and the guy is wearing and it's going to be a guy, he's got a big beard and he's wearing overalls and he talks with a deep southern accent, and you can probably guess what his personal beliefs are like, what his political beliefs are like, even what kind of food he likes. But the problem is, if you were to go to the Davis Center, you wouldn't see anyone like that. There might be some people with southern accents. There might be some people with pickup trucks, some people who like fried chicken, and there might even be a Confederate flag or two. But nobody that's got all of this stuff together. When we think about the examples that we use to create stereotypes, they're the most salient ones. They're the most accessible examples, the one that come to our minds first, and oftentimes the most fluent examples. Fluency refers to a quality of something being easily processable or understandable, like a subject that's easy to understand, language that's easy to understand, or examples that are easy to understand. Complex examples, like someone from the country who drives a sedan, or someone who owns a pickup truck but doesn't have a Confederate flag. That complexity is hard to understand. So our stereotypes are often not only not represented, but they're also overly simplistic. In addition, these stereotypes tend to be really, really resilient because of the qualities of confirmation bias and belief persistence, which your textbook talks about, and also the comic from the Oatmeal talks about. That when we hold a stereotype, we really easily recognize examples that support that stereotype, and we resist changing that stereotype when we see examples that don't line up with it. We just say, well, that's not somebody who exists within this stereotype, and my stereotype is still correct. One of the big problems here is what I talked about at the beginning. Assimilation is way easier than accommodation, right? And as a result, we're going to fight to keep our stereotypes in place so we don't have to change our understanding of the world. I mean, after all, what if the world wasn't populated by billions of individuals who fit within a few neatly organized groups, but instead billions of individuals who all needed to be understood as individuals? That'd be really, really tough. That'd be tough in part because one of the big things that schemas do is they tell us what to expect from the world around us, how to prepare for it, and how to interpret what we see. This gets us into the second part of this video here, what are called construals. You see, when we see a thing, whether it's a car or a dog or a piece of clothing or a person, even a vehicle, right? We use our schemas to categorize it. We figure out which schema this thing fits within, and then we use that schema and what we think we know about these things to interpret or construe the additional stuff we experience, like a person's behavior. We're going to go through a few examples here, and I'm going to ask you to stop the video and stuff. So in a second, I'm going to ask you to pause the video, get a piece of paper, and do a couple of things. But for example, let's think about the schema for dog. What I want you to do right now is I want you to write down your schema for dog. In a second here, I want you to pause the video and then just grab a piece of paper and a pencil and write everything you know to be true about dogs. I'll get you started. Dogs are furry, they've got 4 legs, they've got a tail. So go ahead, pause the video right now. I'll be here when you get back. And just write down all the things you know to be true about a dog. Go. Okay, so by now you've hopefully had the chance to write down a lot of things that you know to be true about all dogs. That if you hear that somebody has a dog, you know this thing is true. Maybe it's that they've got fur, that they're energetic, that they're loud, that they're dirty, that they're friendly. Whatever it is, this is stuff that's true about dogs. The one thing you don't want to think about are specific examples like, my friend has one. It's true that your friend has a dog, but your friend doesn't own every dog, right? So this is the stuff you know to be true about dogs. Now, that schema tells you how to interpret dogs that you experience in the future. If you don't really like dogs and your schema includes things like dogs are dirty and loud and aggressive and unpredictable, and I tell you I have a dog, you might conclude that you're not sure you like me very much. If on the flip side you believe that dogs are friendly and energetic but goofy and they're great companions, and I tell you I have a dog, you might believe that we're kindred spirits. In addition, were you to encounter me and my dog Ruger on a walk, you might interpret his behavior differently. I'm going to show you a lot of Ruger's stuff this semester, but one of the things that's true about boxers in general is that they're really, really energetic dogs. They're friendly, they're goofballs, but they're energetic. And Ruger is big. He weighs half as much as I do. He's a pretty heavy guy, and he's big. And we adopted him, but before he was adopted to us, one of the things that a lot of breeders do with boxers is they have their ears cropped, the way ears are cropped for pit bulls or Rottweilers or Dobermans. So he's a big dog with pointy ears who gets really excited. If I was walking Ruger down the road and you were to see me, and he made eye contact with you and started pulling on his leash toward you, dragging me down the street towards you, and he's slathering and he's got these pointy ears and he's jumping up, your schema would tell you how to interpret that behavior and also how to respond to it. If you believe that Ruger's really friendly, you might respond to it by crouching down and reaching out to him and meeting him partway and petting him because you know to interpret this as friendly behavior. But if you believe that dogs are aggressive, if you've known people who show you and tell you that dogs are aggressive, if you had bad experiences with dogs before and you know they're not to be trusted, your response would not be to kneel down to greet him. It might be to cross to the other side of the road or even to turn around and go the other direction, right? Either way, this response would be different based on your previous experience. Now, of course, the question here is, who's correct? And really the answer is neither. This is why I say we don't really know anything about the world around us. We all have different schemas, and none of them are correct or incorrect. They're just a result of our experiences. And when we draw conclusions about the people around us, conclusions about people based on their circumstances is somebody successful because they worked hard or they were lucky? Is somebody unsuccessful because the world was cruel to them or because they made bad choices? We put them into a camp, we put them into a group and draw conclusions about them using our schemas, snap judgments. And very often, the way we use these schemas is incorrect because, again, they're oversimplified and based on the least accurate, the most attention-getting examples. Another example we could think of ties into other people's behavior, right? What does it mean, for example, if you're in class and somebody asks you for a pencil? Well, if we look at recent findings from social psychology, most women in classrooms, if they're asked by somebody male or female, depends on who you're attracted to. If you're asked by somebody attractive whether or not you have a pen or pencil, it's only natural to assume about them that they're unprepared, they don't have a pen or pencil, and they'd like to borrow one. Men, on the other hand, and you've probably already guessed, men, on the other hand, are a lot more quick to jump to the conclusion that the reason they're being asked for a pen or pencil is because the person's attracted to them. It's a really funny thing, but there have been a number of findings recently that show that if you're a guy and you think somebody's hitting on you, you need to check yourself pretty seriously because chances are they're not. You might think about another example. If somebody in your class were to ask you to come to a party over the weekend, what would you do to be ready for that party? Well, your response might be based on what this person looks like. Do they look like they're somebody who's young and parties hard? Do you need to pregame beforehand and bring a 24-pack of Natty Light with you? Or do they look like somebody who's got kids or even grandkids? Is their idea of a party something that's going to be a little bit more family friendly? Maybe they're going to be watching the most recent episodes of The Witcher and swapping fan theories about what's going to happen next, right? Either way, these things lead us to make predictions, interpretations that are called construals. All of these things are construals. And if you've heard about and are thinking about the term to misconstrue or misinterpret, that's exactly what happens here. When we have a schema that doesn't really match up with how the world works, but we don't realize it, we use it to interpret or construe the world around us, but it ends up being a misconstrual that can lead to a problem like you pregame before somebody's niece's birthday party, right? Or you show up with your copy of the Game of Thrones novels to talk about your favorite fan theories and everybody's partying way too hardy. In this way, our schemas and construals mislead us all the time. Again, they're overly simplified. They're based on the most salient and extreme examples. And these really fluent ones can also be influenced by other biases like the recency bias or the negativity bias. The negativity bias means that given information of equal impact or of equal emotional value, we tend to give a lot more weight to stuff that's negative. This is an evolutionary adaptation that we're going to pay more attention to something that seems threatening. As a result, friendly news reports versus scary news reports, the scary news reports are the ones we're going to pay closer attention to and we're going to think about a lot more over the rest of the day, making that information more salient, more fluent, and more accessible. In addition, the recency bias means that when something happens more recently, we tend to think about it more and it becomes more available in our minds. And the more available that schema is, the more likely we are to use it as an explanation for things. All of this fuels something called the bad news bias. The bad news bias is a phenomenon that's been observed more recently, wherein we see that people who watch bad news, so people who watch cable news in particular, more often are more likely to think the world is a bad or dangerous place, which only makes sense. If you spend a lot of time steeping yourself in scary news reports, people yelling loudly and angrily about the injustices of the world and about all of the horrible things that are happening, that information is going to be rattling around in your head as you go around looking for explanations for things. This is part of why, for example, my father got a call from his sister on the 4th of July when I was 10 years old telling us that there was a gang war going outside, when any reasonable person would know that those loud bangs and pops were, of course, just fireworks. So as you may have guessed, when we think about these schemas, remember this way that we categorize and organize information to help us understand things, you may have guessed, based on some of the stuff I mentioned before, that we even have a schema for ourselves. And in this way, you would be right. Our self-concept, our self-schema, includes all of the things that we know about ourselves. But what do we really know about ourselves, and how do we know it? How reliable is it, really? What kind of information do we include as being who we really are, and what information do we dismiss as an outlier, as an exception? When you do something bad or wrong, does that make you a bad person, or are you a good person who slipped up just this once? So what kind of a person are you really? What does the information you know really say about yourself, and why do we choose to believe what it is we choose to believe ourselves? All of this and more next week in social psychology as we talk about the social self. As always, if you have any questions about schemas, about construals, about all of these biases, reach out to me during office hours or send me a message or an email. You do want to pay close attention to all of those terms that I shared here in the video. I apologize for not popping those terms up like I had before, but I was running short on time. And even though I think I've got an overall better recording setup, I think my software is a little bit janky. So I apologize for the lag in the audio video and the lack of terminology here. But if you have questions about all of this, as always, feel free to reach right on out to me and let me know, and I will get right back to you. Thanks for your hard work, and I'll look forward to talking to you more about schemas, construals, and who in the heck we really are here in class.